Well, again, thank you, church, for spending part of your Sunday with us. And before we get started, some of you know one of ours hasn't been with us for a while. He's been traveling. He's doing work up in the Boston or Maryland area, and that's Troy. And so we want to say hi to Troy. He's been keeping up with us through Facebook, and so, or not through Facebook, sorry. Troy does not like Facebook. I apologize to Troy when he watches this on YouTube later. But he's been keeping up with us through YouTube, and so I want to let him know that we do appreciate him and know that we're praying for you, buddy. We love you. We're ready for you to be back here. Be safe. Okay? But as we jump in today, Mark chapter 2, finishing up Mark chapter 2, and from where we left off last week. Last week we ended with the paralytic man being lowered through the roof, right? And we talked about sort of the different situation going on there, where the paralytic man was probably saying, no, I'm good. Don't do this. I'm okay. And his friends telling him, no, you don't understand the power of the one we're taking you to. And so we're picking up after that and into verse 13, which is the call to Matthew. It says, then Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd was coming to him, and he taught them. Then moving on, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, follow me. So he got up and followed him. Right? That's the call to Matthew. Of course, Matthew goes into more detail in his own story there, but Mark here writing that literally Jesus goes, sees this tax collector, and says, let's go. And he left what he was doing, which, again, as we've talked about here, I'm not saying to put your whole theology in the show The Chosen, but The Chosen does a good example of showing this, of what Matthew's life would have been like. That's hard for us to understand, right? It's easy for us sometimes when we read this to think, oh, well, yeah, he gave up being a tax collector. Woe is him, right? He went to follow Jesus. The reality is Matthew would have been a person of position, authority, power, money. All of the things that the world said had status and made him important is what Matthew had. But when Jesus came and said, no, follow me, Matthew laid all of that down to go follow Jesus. He chose to walk away from position and authority and power and all of those things because he understood and knew the power of Jesus. And when we think about that for us, and what that is that there are things that there is going to come time in everyone's life where God says, hey, you need to lay this down and follow me. And so often, if we are not careful in our humanness, we will say it, right? We'll say, okay, I'm going to lay it down, right? I'm going to lay it down, but I'm just going to keep a hand on it, right? I mean, I'm going to lay it down, but I just need to hold on to it for a little bit longer. When the reality is that when God tells us to lay something down to follow him, it is lay it down, turn around, put your back to it, and walk away. Don't come back. And so we see that, right? That's what Matthew does. Matthew gets up and he walks, and then we get this next part. It says, while he was reclining at the table in Levi's house, this is Matthew, many tax collectors and sinners were also guests with Jesus and his disciples, because there were many who were following him. Which Matthew would have been, if you know any of the history behind this, as a tax collector, Matthew would have been considered a traitor to the Jewish people. Right? He was a traitor. They would have wanted nothing to do with him. And so when Matthew would have people over, it would either be the other tax collectors that nobody else wanted to spend time with, or the other people in society that everybody would say, well, don't talk to them, stay away from them. Or as Joseph said, this wouldn't have been a holy huddle. This wouldn't have been the people that were the front and center at synagogue, the front and center at the temple. These were not the people that in the community everybody went, oh man, look at them. They're awesome. They're this, they're that. These were the people that when they walked, everybody went, yeah, don't look at them. Right? These were the people that people would, if they were walking at you, you'd cross the street. Go to the other side. That's the people that are at this dinner. For us, getting a little closer to home, it's that group of people. You're going to start thinking in your head now that I'm saying this, that if you knew these group of people were getting together and they said, hey, you should come have dinner with us, you're going to be like, can't make it. It's that group of people that even you would say, I'm not doing that. Yet Jesus is there with him and his disciples are there with him. And this is where we want to be careful, because this is what Joseph was talking about with the kids, right? Because when we fall into that trap, and we fall into the trap, sometimes it happens as a modern American Christians, we get into our holy circles. We get into these small groups of people that we spend time with that think, look, and act like us. And then when anybody else tries to come into that circle, they either get ridiculed because they don't understand all the lingo, and people go, well, how do you not know this? Right? Well, because they weren't raised in church, or they haven't studied it, or because no one has taught them, or they never get an invitation because we get on our high horses and think, well, I don't want to talk to them. But we see here what Jesus is doing, and then we see what happens, and if we're not careful, we fall into this trap where it says in 16, when the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, which, don't get it twisted, that is a distinction put in on purpose. There was a difference in this time between being a sinner and being a tax collector, and in that order for a reason. The scribes here are basically saying it would have been better for him just to be with sinners than to eat with sinners and tax collectors. One to them was worse than the other. They asked his disciples, which I love that, right? Because the question they have is not for the disciples, it's for who? It's for Jesus. But they've already gotten their hands slapped once already when the paralytic man was healed, and they didn't say anything there. They just thought about it in their hearts, and Jesus called them out. So they've already gotten their hands slapped once. So they're not going to Jesus, they're going to his disciples, which in the same way today, there are plenty of people that have questions in their lives that they need to go to the Father with, but they know the answer already. They know that the answer from God is either stop or don't or it's wrong. So instead of that, they will come to us as believers, and we as believers better be real clear where we stand in Scripture. Because if someone comes to you and says, what does the Bible say about this thing, whatever this thing is? Well, if the Bible flat out says that that thing is a sin, no questions asked, you better be open and honest and tell people it's a sin. And then follow with, the good news is it is not unforgivable. God offers forgiveness and mercy, but yes, it is a sin. And so we see here, they ask his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And I can imagine the statement, right? We read that in our English, or what we see here, and I can imagine, if you'll hearken back with me to the scene of them kind of standing, because they wouldn't go in, right? They're outside, because we're not going to belittle ourselves by going into the same room with these people. And I can imagine them standing outside with their arms crossed, looking all prim and proper, and going, well, why is he doing that? Why is he eating with those sinners and tax collectors and people we shouldn't be associating with? In the same way that if we are not careful, we will get on our Christian high horse and begin to belittle people that we should really be breaking bread with, sitting with and telling the truth. And Joseph was getting to this with the kids. I'm not saying here, don't walk out of here saying that your inner circle needs to be these people. That is not what I'm saying. The example here by Jesus is the same thing. His inner circle were his disciples, his believers, the people following him. But he offered himself and went and offered the truth to anyone who would listen. In the same way for us today as believers, those in your inner circle should not be those that are of the world. We should not be giving people that have no biblical worldview or biblical understanding or relationship with Jesus, most importantly, any say over what happens in our life. As Christians, the people we go to for advice should be people who think and believe like us. We should surround ourselves with those people to listen, to ask advice from when we need help, going to them. Not those that would be of the world. That doesn't mean we exclude the people of the world. We need to have those people and tell them about Jesus so that they can become those people that we would be able to go to in those moments of need. But we see here in verse 17, when Jesus heard this, he told them, those who are well don't need a doctor, but the sick do. I didn't come for the righteous, but for sinners. Right? Jesus telling them flat out, he came for those that need salvation. For us as Christians today, our job is to go and be the doctor to a world that desperately needs to hear the truth. When we think about that for us, I think about that for myself, that if I'm going to go to a doctor, I don't want to go to the doctor who just tells me, yeah, you're good, everything's wonderful, don't worry about it, you're great. I want to go to the doctor who tells me what? Hey, you need to fix this, and fix this, because if you don't, it's going to kill you. Right? And for all of us in this room, we need to understand that that's what Jesus does. Jesus is not that doctor who's going to look at you and say, well, you're great just the way you are. Don't change a thing. Jesus is going to look at you and say, I love you right where you're at, but we're not going to leave you this way. We're going to change some things. Right? We're going to change some things to look more like me because I am better, and looking and acting and being more like me is better than what you are right now. Right? He accepts us just as we are. He loves us enough to not leave us that way. And that's what he's telling these scribes of the Pharisees right there. Yes, you look at them as sinners and tax collectors right now, but they're not going to stay there. In the same way in our lives, every person in this room who's given their life to Jesus can give countless testimony about how you are different now through your relationship to him than you were before. And the sweetness and the joy in those things. But it continues, right? We get to verse 18. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Now this is important here because John's disciples would have been those that John had told about Jesus, and the Pharisees were fasting. So these two groups are doing this together, or at the same time at least. And people came and asked him, why do John's disciples, aka the people that are saying you're the Messiah, and these Pharisees who seem to not like you, why are they both fasting, but your disciples do not? So you have these two groups that are doing this one thing. You seem to be somewhat aligned with them. You're not. Which one is right? That's what they're asking. Who is right? Jesus said to them, verse 19, the wedding guests cannot fast while the groom is with them, can they? Right? You think about that for us. That's a thing, right? If you go to a wedding, typically, when do you eat? When the bridegroom gets there, right? Now, some more modern weddings, right? Like this is the one thing I enjoyed. I love getting to preach any wedding I get to preach. But the last two that I've done, all right, I did Randy's and I did Cameron's. They fed us some snacks before the bride and groom came in, which if you're planning a wedding, that's always appreciated. Okay? But typically you wait for them. But Jesus here is saying that as long as they have the groom with them, continue 19, they cannot fast. Jesus here equating himself, right? Why would they fast? Why would we not go and do what Jesus is doing if we have him in front of us? Why would we purposely exclude ourselves from learning and growing in him when he was here? That's what he's saying about his disciples. Why would they do that if the thing they need and want is right in front of them? 20, but the time will come when the groom is taken away from them, and they will fast in that day. For no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth onto an old garment. Otherwise, the new patch pulls away from the old cloth, and a worse tear is made. Right? Those of you that have repaired clothes know exactly what's being said here, right? If you're going to repair something, you do it the right way. Jesus here isn't coming to continue a system that was working. He is adjusting what was there and fixing it to himself. Verse 22, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost as well as the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. Right? Jesus here taking everything these people have understood. Right? There's been a system in place for generations to this point, and Jesus is doing it different. And when they ask why, again, back to the show The Chosen, there's a statement made that I love in there. It says, get used to different. And that's what Jesus does. He comes and he makes everything different. And in our humanity, we hear that word different and it's too close to change, and we instantly go, I don't like change. But the understanding for us should be that when Jesus comes and supplies the change, we not only should welcome it, we should rejoice in it. Because that change is change that is only for our good. Never in the history of existence has Jesus changed someone to make them worse. Never in the history of existence has Jesus worked in someone's life to make it more miserable or to cause them to be eternally lost. He always works for the good. Now, people will see that and choose to not follow or not do what He's called them to do. But Jesus coming to us is always going to make us different and for our betterment. And we continue with the same thought in that as we go into verse 23. It says, on the Sabbath, right? So if you imagine here, Jesus, it's kind of working up in the frustration of the people at the time. And now we get to the Sabbath. And this is the thing that's really going to push them over the edge, right? You kind of know what I'm talking about here. If you've ever watched somebody, especially kids, if one kid learns how to push another kid's buttons, right? That kid might kind of push that button, and then they might come back a little bit later and maybe push it a little more. And then eventually that kid's going to do what? They're going full press to see what happens. And here is that, right? This is kind of that full press moment where they're going to be like, all right, Jesus, you sat with sinners and tax collectors. All right? You're not fasting when we fast, but the Sabbath, that's the line. That's it. Right? It's that, they're flabbergasted, right? Their flabbers are gasted at this point. Because we see in 23, on the Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to make their way, picking some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Because if you know the Levitical laws, you don't work on the Sabbath. You don't do any work. You don't travel. You don't do anything. In fact, if you go to a modern Jewish kitchen today and you find a modern Jewish oven, my mother-in-law has one of these, not that she's Jewish, she just got a good deal. It has a Sabbath mode button on it. So this still happens to this day. He said to them, have you ever read what David and those who were hungry did when they were in need and hungry? Which, if Jesus answers your question with a question, be afraid. Right? Jesus answers their question with a question, which at that point, they should have realized, okay, we have messed up, our bad, we're going to go about our business. Right? Verse 26, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest and ate the sacred bread, which was not lawful for anyone to eat except the priests, and also gave some to his companions. So he poses this question to them, which they would have known this. This would have been common knowledge to them that David did this. And the answer to that, at the same time, would have been common knowledge to them that what did God do in that time? Blessed him. Blessed David and his companions. Because what God was interested in, just like he was with David and just like he is today, God is not interested in ritual or circumstance. He is interested in worship. He is interested in your heart. He is not interested in the motions, which we get really good at if we are not careful. We get really good at the motions. And God is not interested in the motions. He is interested in your heart. And where is it? And you've heard me say this, and you've heard others say it before, right? Coming in here and sitting in a pew doesn't make you a Christian any more than sitting in a garage makes you a Ferrari. When we come in here and we don't evaluate our hearts and we go through the motions, then we walk out of here feeling good because we came to church, but we didn't learn anything. We didn't get closer to him. And so Jesus follows that statement and says this in 27, and he told them the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Pause there for a minute and let that marinate in you for a second and think about what that means. What he's telling them very clearly is that God was holy with or without us. And this idea of the Sabbath, this thing that you have, that was created for you. Right? It's not like it existed beforehand and God said, well, I need some people to follow these Sabbath rules, so I'm going to create humanity. Humanity existed and then the Sabbath came behind that. God created that for us. He didn't already have it and then need us. So what he's telling them is exactly what we just said right there. God's not interested in their acts of service here. He's not interested in them being able to say, well, we sat on the Sabbath and we didn't work. Look at us, we're good. We donated our money. Right? We went and sang the 4 songs and watched a children's sermon and then we left. He's not interested in our walk. He's not interested in us coming into a place or walking through our daily life, going through the motions, looking Christian, and not being a Christ follower. Now, I brought up my mother-in-law a minute ago. One of the other things that my mother-in-law does, and I have uber respect for her in this, was for the longest time, she would not put any sort of Christian paraphernalia on her car. And we'd always kind of, she plays piano in her church, like she's super involved, like Patty is, she is all about it. And it always kind of, I asked one time, I was like, well, why not? Like, you're a believer, like you represent Jesus, like why not? And she goes, because my driving doesn't always uphold the standard that I think Jesus would want. That is not a shot at her driving. But I looked at her in that and I said, I appreciate the truth in that. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been blown by somebody or seen not nice things from people in their steering wheel, pointed at me or others, and then follow me to such and such church. Or when the rapture happens, car will be unoccupied. Realizing that Jesus isn't interested in our bumper stickers, our Jesus fish on our cars, the Christian jewelry we might wear or not wear, the t-shirt we wear. He's interested in your heart. And are you living for Him daily? Are you seeking to be like Him or be like the world? Because if you're seeking to be like the world, why? Why do you want to be like a place that only seeks your destruction? Because verse 28, therefore the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. We didn't come into this place today for us. If you came to this place today for you, why? Why? We should come here to worship a Savior that we were worshiping on the way here and that we will continue to worship when we walk out of here. Why? Because He's better than us. Because He's the only thing good in the history of creation. And that when we walk out of here, there is nothing else good. And when we come in here, there is nothing good except Him. So we look at this today threefold. One, Jesus is calling to everyone, just like He did Matthew. Follow me. And some of you in this room might be in that position where you've never done that. You've never put everything down and said, yes, Lord, I will follow you. It's time. Maybe you're sitting in here and you've accepted Jesus, but you find yourself surrounding yourself with a bunch of like-minded Christians, and you're never taking the opportunity to share the gospel with people that desperately need to hear it. If you go back and read that story of Jesus dining with sinners and tax collectors, and you don't find yourself occasionally sharing the gospel with sinners and tax collectors, then guess what? You're the scribe in the story. There has to come times where we take the gospel to people that need to hear it. And then the last part. When things are different, get used to different. And realize that different means Jesus is not interested in the ritual of your life. He is interested in your heart. We need to stop walking through the everyday motions of things and live for Him in everything that we do. Wherever you're at in this, give yourself to Jesus and trust that He's going to take care of it. The worst thing you could do is sit in here today and do nothing. To walk out of here today and say, I was good when I came in, I'll be good when I leave. No. We should all be different when we walk out of this place. And be different every single day. Let's pray. God, we thank you for today. And God, I pray that we would be different, that we would be set apart, that we would be your people, that we would seek your words, we would seek your truth, and we would deliver those to a world that desperately needs it. That we would not be those that would sit back and watch others that are believers and say, why are they hanging out with sinners and tax collectors? But that we would step in and say, can I pray for you? Can I help? What do you need? That we would understand that this thing we do here, this worship, this didn't exist and then you created us to fulfill this goal. It exists because you existed before it. We do this to worship you. You are no less God or perfection if we stopped doing this. In fact, you are perfect with or without us. And we would remember that. Because that allows us to rejoice in the fact that in the midst of your perfection, you choose us in our imperfection. But you don't leave us that way. You provide yourself to make us better. And that we would speak that truth to anyone who would listen to us out here. And as we walk out of this place today, we will live differently. It's in your name we pray.